is nearly 4 years ago that I first came to Manchester. And at that very first meeting, Mr. and Mrs. Spencer were touched by this message. And ever since, as you know, they have molded their lives into its pattern. No one could do that, however, without attracting to themselves others who also catch and are touched by this message. And so it is that you students who are here this afternoon, are the ones who evidently have been touched by this message and have been uniting with Mr. and Mrs. Spencer in the study and the practice of its work. And so you have made yourself a part of the whole Infinite Way activity. The Infinite Way is really infinite. It covers the globe, but it is finding acceptance, as is natural, only in the Protestant part of the world, since the Roman Catholic part of the world is not ready outwardly or openly to accept such as we have to offer. As a matter of fact, for many years it was only the metaphysical world who accepted us. Students of Christian Science, of Unity, of some branches of New Thought, were able to find in our message that which they were seeking. And so we were literally an appeal only to those of metaphysical background or with a potentiality of accepting metaphysical teaching. However, I have said over and over and over in these past years that we are at the edge of a new era in religious history. In the background, as a beholder, I have wondered just how the new age was going to be ushered in. I've wondered how an appeal was going to be made to the churches. I can go back a bit to explain what I mean. When Mrs. Eddy first started to practice Christian Science, it was her hope that she would never have to found a church, that the churches already in existence would be able to add to their activity that of spiritual healing. And of course, if that had been able to take place, there would have been no need for a Christian Science church or organization. The church as it is would have studied the principle, done the spiritual healing, and gradually whatever had to be changed in church doctrine would automatically have taken place. But the church definitely excluded spiritual healing and refused to include it. And it was for that reason that she founded a Christian Science church, and that it has grown into the proportions that it has. Now, since then, as is inevitable, truth being infinite, it will always appear in different forms, in different ways, in different languages. And so spiritual healing has sprung up outside of the Christian Science church, and some who have been a part of the church have separated themselves from it and carried on in their individual light. Now, the success of Christian Science, and it has been a success, has compelled the attention of the world to think in terms of spiritual healing. And as a result also of the evangelical healers who are now in the field, such as Brother Mandus, Oral Roberts, is compelling the organized church to think more in terms of spiritual healing, with the result that in the United States, many individual Episcopal churches, that is the American branch of the Church of England or similar teaching, has been having healing sessions. They have had ministers actually doing spiritual healing work, not too successfully, because they don't know the principle of healing, and they have a great difficulty in finding what it is. The reason is this. Until the advent of the book, The Infinite Way, there was no correct textbook on spiritual healing except Science and Health. And they couldn't use that because that was a part of an organized church. To have used that would have been really to put themselves under obligation to another church, and perhaps in their sense a competitive church. And so they did not use that, except that some ministers may privately and secretly have read it. But the principles that were given in the Christian Science textbook were not used, and there are no other correct books on spiritual healing. The nearest approach to a correct one is Emily Cady's Lessons in Truth. And that is really an adaptation of Science and Health with some parts left out. But they might have used that with great success, and probably some have used it without its openly being known. Now, universities have also attempted to solve the problem of spiritual healing, but the best that any of them have been able to do is come up with psychological healing. Sometimes they mix a little religion in it and use words like God and prayer and Christ. But if you were to study what they're teaching, you would know that it's merely psychological healing. The result is that with all of these attempts to adopt spiritual healing, no one of these has been able to successfully do it because they haven't the principles with which to work, what we in our work call the correct letter of truth, on which you build the spirit. As I said last night, if you were to practice the presence of God diligently, as I outlined it last night, and as is outlined in this book, Practicing the Presence, and the new one, The Art of Meditation, you would automatically, within a year, spiritualize your own consciousness to such a degree that you'd normally and naturally be living the God life. So it is, if you have the correct letter of truth and practice it for a year, you can develop the healing consciousness. But you can't do it if you are mixing up Christian Science and unity and New Thought and Infinite Way and faith healing and psychological healing and mental healing. It just won't work. Your mind becomes then a sewer, just a metaphysical sewer. You have to find a principle, and you have to abide by it. Now, finding the principle, abiding with it, living with it, letting it live in you, practicing, not being afraid of failure, not being afraid to show no progress for a while, but taking the same attitude as if you were studying mathematics or any science, knowing that you're not going to get 100% in your grades to start with, knowing that it means digging in, study, application, discipline, inevitably will lead to success in the healing work and in living a spiritual life. Now, with this in mind, I have wondered how the church is going to come about to find a principle that it can teach and practice and inevitably show forth in fine healing works. And naturally, it was my hope that the infinite way would be some part of it. Perhaps that is one reason that I have been led from the beginning to avoid any step that would organize us or set us apart as a separate religion, or as somebody set apart with a great secret that nobody else had. That is one reason why I have been very free in the distribution of the writings and the recordings. I would like this principle to permeate consciousness. I know it has a part in it. I'm not seeking for credit, and I'm not seeking for profit. It's a principle, it's a God-given principle, it's a God-ordained principle, it's a God-revealed principle. It belongs to God. Because it belongs to God, it belongs to God's children. And therefore, I am but an instrument through which it is being turned loose in human consciousness. I am the instrument through which you are receiving it. But since this is a spiritual principle and is of God, it is necessary that you be instruments through which it is brought further into human consciousness. No one person can cover this globe and lift up the entire world alone. One person can be an instrument through which it reaches human consciousness, but then it takes thousands and tens of thousands, each being an instrument. And just as Mr. and Mrs. Spencer have been instruments that have held and worked with this group and held them together and started them, so must you draw around you in time other groups, other individuals, so that you are an instrument used by God to place this into consciousness. Now, the first public recognition that we received from the church was when the Protestant Institute of Publishers asked the editor of the Episcopal Church News, which is the official organ of the Episcopal Church in the United States, to select out of over 900 books a small list which was to be recommended reading for all Protestants. And that editor chose The Art of Meditation in his list of 26 books, so that at this moment the book is circulating among Protestants of all denominations in the United States. In a small way, of course, but remember, we're not interested in size, we're interested in one, and then the small group, and then the larger group. Then the second recognition is from Canada, where the United Church of Canada, with 75,000 families subscribing to its magazine, was notified through the last issue of their magazine, that The Art of Meditation is recommended for a textbook on meditation and inner prayer. Well, of course, all of these writings, and as you will see when you have The Art of Meditation, is filled with spiritual healing. And right on the cover, the publisher says that the author of that book is the author of the two well-known books, The Infinite Way and 3, Living the Infinite Way and Practicing the Presence. So their attention there is immediately called to those books which are the textbooks of our work. And so I think that you'll agree with me when I say that the Protestant Church has exposed itself to books that will give it a spiritual healing principle that is tried and found workable. In other words, not only the many years in which I practiced as a practitioner, but remember that the 10 years since we're under the banner of the Infinite Way, not only I have healed, but the students whom we have taught have been healing. So we know that we have a principle. And because we are not organized, and because we're not a separate religion, and because we are not claiming that we can save the world or trying to proselytize and draw the world into us, because we are merely offering a principle of spiritual healing and spiritual living, anyone can adopt it without giving up their identity or without saying that some other religion was better than theirs and now they have to acknowledge it, but with perfect grace can accept the principle as coming not from another religion, but from God itself through man who has no religious identity. Now, so it is. When you present this message, you have to be sure, first of all, that you know it. You have to know the principles which constitute this message, because this isn't faith healing, it isn't Christian Science healing, it isn't unity healing, it isn't New Thought healing. There are specific principles that set it apart as the Infinite Way. Principles that none of these other teachings include. And if you're to present the Infinite Way to anyone, you have to know these principles. Now, the writings set them all forth. But probably you would have to be a student, a serious student, to sit down and imbibe them, since in the writings they are not written down in sequence or in any specific order. They are merely written in the books as they appear, sometimes not even recognizable as specific principles. But to help the students recognize these principles, we have done these things. We have one tape called number 17 of the Kailua series, which is an entire 2 hours of the specific principles in the message of the Infinite Way. Then there is a tape number 4, which is a complete setting forth of the body. Now, the Infinite Way is the only metaphysical teaching on record that specifically teaches the truth about body, even this physical body, from a spiritual standpoint. And it is, I believe, on both sides, isn't it? Or one side, anyhow, of number 4 Kailua series, and gives a clear picture of the body. You had it recently in one of the monthly letters. Now, in addition to that, there are 2 other tapes which you will have in the near future. And these were done in Sydney, Australia. And they are called the Sydney, Australia tapes. And these set forth the principles in even a larger way, or deeper way, or more extended perhaps, than number 17 of the Kailua series. At any rate, they complement each other, go well together. Now, with those principles in your mind, as you read the writings become clearer to you. Now you see not only what the writings say, but what underlies them, what was in the author's mind when he was writing them down, and perhaps not thinking in writing them down that they were to be an exposition of the principle in teaching form. But it is necessary that you, as an inner group, as an inner circle, as a working part of the infinite way, know these principles and begin to practice them, not caring too much whether you're overly successful with your first use of it, but determined to continue in the practice until you are. Now, while we are not an organization, we are united in the Spirit. We are one. We are one in God, and therefore we are one with each other. But we are one as a group of Infinite Way students, showing ourselves forth to the world as such. Therefore, it behooves us to know as much as we can about what it is that we're presenting to the world, so that we do it credibly and successfully. Now, you will have not only this tape that we are now making, but you will have the other side of it. And on the other side of it, there is a very remarkable class given to a group such as this in London last week, what we call the inner group. That is the group of working students, and saying things that couldn't be said at an open or public lecture. Because you will find, as you advance in understanding of this work, that there are points that you cannot mention to beginners and young students on this path for fear of being misunderstood. And I want to cover a few of those points. We'll start with our main subject in the Infinite Way, which, as you know, is the word God. And I say this to you in this little group: there is no such God as the church is praying to. There is none such, because if there were, they'd be getting answers. The only reason there haven't been answers all through the centuries is they're not praying to God. They are praying to their concept of God, but it isn't God. The difference is this: if you know me and you ask something of me, you're apt to get it. At least there's always that possibility. But if you don't know me, and you only entertain in your thought a concept about me, and you turn to that concept to get something, you are not going to get an answer, even if you have a wonderful concept of me. You may even think of me in shining white with a white robe and sitting at the right hand of God, and then pray to me and get no answer. Because it isn't me. It's a concept of me that you are entertaining. And concepts don't pay off. Now, to know God aright is life eternal, Scripture says. And you may take that as your shibboleth, as your password. To know God aright is life eternal. So that I can say this to you, that if you were to give up all your study and devote yourself entirely to finding out what God is, you wouldn't lose a thing, you wouldn't miss a thing. Or, if you were just to study my writings with one question in your mind: what is God? And keep that uppermost with every page you read, because to me, God is the only word in my writings. All the rest is nothing but lace trimmings. God is the substance of my writings. God is the essence of them. God is its word. Now, not God as you may have thought of God, not God as you may now be thinking of God. Certainly not God as the world thinks of God, but God. Now, you can safely assume that you're not interested in what anybody in this world thinks about God, that you must know God yourself. If you could be so bold, you may find that you're the only person in the world who really knows God, because nearly everybody else, I can assure you, is mistaken. It's only the few who have glimpsed God as God is. Now, the importance of that is this. When you know God, you understand prayer, and prayer is our contact with God. And be assured of this, you'd have a hard time to travel the whole world and find 100 people who knew what prayer is. A very hard time. Prayer is nothing like what the dictionary tells you. That also is a man-made concept of prayer. And it's a concept that is as valueless as trying to drink a glass of water to get healed of polio. No, prayer is an individual's communion with God. That's the true nature and essence of prayer. And above all, it has nothing to do with petition. The minute petition comes in, it isn't prayer. The minute there is an asking for anything, it isn't prayer. The moment that it is an attempt to influence God, it isn't prayer. Now remember, you can't say this to your beginner. You can't say this to the stranger who is asking what the infinite way is. You can't. You have to give milk to the infant and meat to the adult. But you won't do the world much good if you are living on milk. You have got to dig into the meat of the Word. And you have got to learn the meaning of God and the meaning of prayer. Then when you have it, you can set it forth in a language that the world can accept, even though the world doesn't understand what you're saying. At least you won't offend it, and you'll give it a chance to come to its own understanding. Here, chapter 2 of Practicing the Presence, what are we seeking? Is it God we are seeking, or are we seeking something of God? Now that sums up in a nutshell what I'm saying to you, that if your prayer has anything in it of seeking something from God, you're going to get no answer. I don't care what it is, you're not going to get it. God is not withholding anything. And the minute you start asking God or expecting something from God, you are implying that God is withholding it. Now what kind of a God have you got? You know in your heart and soul, now, in this minute, that there's no God withholding anything. You know that you wouldn't respect or honor such a God. Matter of fact, you wouldn't want to own such a God that is sitting somewhere, inside you or outside, withholding your health, withholding your supply, and just because you ask for it, he's going to give it to you? Oh, my heavens, that makes God less than your own father and mother. And you don't want such a God. Now, you can't quite say it this openly to the young students, but within yourself, when you go to God, you can purify your own consciousness by declaring, God, I'm not coming to you for a thing. I'm not asking for anything. And I'm not coming for anything. Nor am I trying to influence you to give me something or give my mother or my child or my sister or my nation. Now just think of the different God that leaves you with than the one you started with. A God that you will never ask anything of. A God that you will never try to influence in anybody's behalf, your own or another's. That leaves you with a God whom you can really honor in the realization all that God should be doing, God is doing. God is life eternal. Not God will if I pray correctly. Not God will give it or send it. Not God ought to, or not, oh God, do. But God is. God is life eternal. Not, oh God, give us supply. What kind of a God is it that would withhold supply? Not influencing God to send supply to the stricken Syrians or Chinese or whatnots, but, oh, my God is fulfilling itself on earth as it is in heaven. My God is filling the hills. 1,000 hills are filled with cattle. My God is filling this earth with lumber, coal, iron, oil, whatever this world may need in its terms. My God is filling the bushes with roses, not waiting to be prayed to, not waiting to be influenced, not waiting to be begged, not waiting for me to sacrifice. My God is doing these things of its own accord. And in spite of all the church teachings, God's rain falls on the just and the unjust. That's a very difficult thing to accept that kind of a God at first, especially for a church-trained person. A God that makes no distinction between the saint and the sinner, and gives just as liberally to the sinner as to the saint. Gives just as liberally to the white as to the black, or black as to the white. A God who knows no distinction of person, or personality, or color, or race, or creed. You'll see how difficult it is when you start to think how much you have felt that maybe your rewards aren't coming because of your sins of omission or commission, and you haven't any. You haven't any that God is punishing. You may have sins, but they're for your correction. They're for you to know about and to change. But don't treat God as if God were a nasty parent punishing a child. There is no such God. That was the old Hebrew concept of God that was not found in the New Testament. In the New Testament, where Jesus Christ is the minister, he very definitely takes a thief into heaven this very night. He very definitely says to the woman taken in adultery, neither do I condemn thee. Very definitely he held nobody in bondage to sin, never told anyone they were being punished for sin. No place said that God visited their sickness on them because of their sins. No place said that death was inevitable. Turn ye and live. God has no pleasure in your dying. Now, he didn't say that Lazarus was an angel when he raised him from the dead. We know he wasn't. He was just an ordinary man. He didn't say that any of the people he raised from the dead had to be pure human beings. He took them as they were and raised them up. Why? Because in the sight of God there's neither saint nor sinner, neither Jew nor Greek, bond nor free. In the sight of God we are one, and his rain falls on the just and on the unjust. Of course, there again, your beginner will say, well, then what's the use of being good? Well, of course, if you're only being good for a reward, there's no use in being good, because you'll get just as much being bad. But the point is that on the spiritual path, nobody is being good because of what they're going to get out of it. They're being good because that's their innate nature, and they have many ability or qualities that would enable them to be otherwise. Now, think of this. Think what it means to have a God of whom you can say is. God is. God is where I am. God is life eternal where I am. God is love where I am. God is the health of my countenance where I am. See, no dependent on, nothing to do with if you find the right practitioner, or if you find the right teacher, or if you find the right words, or if you sit in the right position, or do the right breathing exercises. Nothing to do with that. It's just God is. God is. In spite of all our human failings, God is. And God is good. Unqualifiedly good. Unequivocally good. Just plain good. If we aren't, it behooves us to find it out and change ourselves. But not because of what we want from God, but because we want to live in accord with our highest understanding of that which is divinely right. Do you see that? Now, when you have such a God, of whom you can always, in the back of your mind, just say is. Oh, God is. That's enough for me to know. God is. I don't have to go into long prayers. I don't have to go into treatments. I don't have to go into anything. God is. If God is, I'm all right. The sad thing should be if I should find out that God isn't. But God is. Now, when you have that, prayer becomes an open book to you. Because now you know that you don't go to God for anything, and you don't pray to God for anything, and you don't hope ever by your prayers to influence God in any way. But now your prayer is actually an opening yourself to the entrance of God into your awareness. As the Hebrew boy Samuel, speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. And then, hear, listen, open, be receptive. Because in the last analysis, that is prayer. Prayer is an inner communion in which you let the Spirit of God take possession of you. You don't try to get possession of God because you can't. A human can't reach God. But God can reach the human and dispel it. In your inner silence, in your inner peaceableness, God can reach you. But through your mind, and with your mind struggling to reach God, you shut God out. And it isn't that God isn't there, but you're not aware of it. It's just as if I put a black cloth in front of my eyes. I have shut the light out. You say, you can't because the light's here. I know the light's here and I can't shut it out, but I've shut it out from me. Well, you can't shut God out of this room, but you can shut God out of your experience. And you do it by mental activities, by striving, struggling, effort, not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. In quietness and confidence shall be my strength. And so you learn to sit in that inner peace, letting God reach you, letting God contact you. We know not what to pray for. We know not how to go out or how to come in. But God's Spirit bears witness with our spirit. And that's prayer. When you let the Spirit of God into you and it bears witness, it mingles with yours, and the two become one, then you demonstrate that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. But you let the Spirit of God come into you without any desires, without wanting anything, without trying to achieve anything, without trying to influence God. It is as if I could say to you, supposing that God was standing here beside me, visible to you. Would you then ask God for something or trust God to fulfill your need? Do you think it would be necessary to enlighten God as to what you need? Or could you not say, look, God, if I try to talk to you, you just hit my mouth. You talk to me. If I ask for anything, clout me. I will let you fulfill me. Wouldn't that be the attitude? Of course, who would dare stand in the presence of God and tell God? What kind of a God? Well, where's the omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence to that? Now, literally, we are standing in the presence of God, and God is as much here with us as any one of us is here with us. The only thing is that God is invisible to our human sight, but not to our spiritual sight. As you rise higher and higher in spiritual awareness, you have periods in which God is just as real to you as we are to each other. But not with eyes or with ears, but with what the Master referred to when he said, do you have eyes and do not see? Do you have ears and do not hear? There must be an inner spiritual faculty with which you can discern God. Now, in these moments of unfoldment, where you are communing with God in this way, not asking God for anything, not trying to influence God, just being receptive to let the Spirit flow, sooner or later, the greatest secret ever known unfolds within you. And while it has been known to the mystics of the world, it has not been known to the churches. That is why they have made their mistake that results in their present futility and their present seeking for something higher. The secret is this: there is only one power, not two. There is no evil power. There is no devil. There are things, circumstances, conditions, and powers to which we of the world give power. For instance, the world gives power to germs, and therefore it has infection and contagion. But every metaphysical healer in the world has at some time or other healed people of infectious and contagious diseases, and thereby proved that they weren't power. For if they had been power, you couldn't have healed them metaphysically, because you did nothing to the germ. If you have ever witnessed the healing of a cold, you have witnessed that germs are not power, because all colds have as their foundation some form of germ. Now, if you have witnessed the healing of poisoning,
And most people who have been active in the work have witnessed that. You have witnessed that poison is not a power. Now, to the world it is, remember, but that's what makes it so. Nothing is good or bad, Mr. Shakespeare says, but thinking makes it so. And if you can be made to accept a germ as a cause of disease, so is it unto you. In accordance with your faith, be it unto you, says the Master. And if you have faith that germs can cause disease, that's what you're going to demonstrate. If you believe that poisons are dangerous, destructive, that's the way it is unto you. If you can be made to believe that whiskey can give you pleasure, you'll demonstrate very quickly that whiskey can give you pain. Whatever you can accept and give power to, that becomes power over you. But if you can accept the teaching of the great Hebrew masters right up to Jesus Christ, and watch him as he stands before Pilate, and Pilate says, I have power to crucify you or set you free. And Jesus says, thou couldst have no power over me unless it came from God. Then watch Jesus Christ as he goes out and touches a leper. Not a bit afraid. And he doesn't get leprosy. Watch the Master as he goes about with no fear of death, no fear of sin, no fear of disease. Always secure in the realization that the Father within me is the only power there is. Now you'll see the secret that underlies spiritual healing. Spiritual healing isn't really the ability to get God heal a disease, because there is no such thing. We use that language to the public, but really and truly among ourselves we know better. God doesn't heal any disease. God would be a monster if he healed disease, because he allowed it to exist and had the power to heal it. He'd be a bigger sinner than we are. God doesn't heal disease. We create our disease by believing it has power, and we uncreate it by coming into the wisdom that says, well, you aren't a power. What have I been fearing? A ghost, a nothingness. But the old Hebrew prophet said, they have the arm of flesh. We have the Lord God Almighty. We have truth. And so it is. Any error, sin, disease, death, false appetite, poverty, has only the power that flesh gives it, that is human belief. It's a concentrated belief. The last enemy that shall be overcome is death. It's such a powerful belief that everybody must die. And some forms of disease give us great resistance in healing, not because they have any power, but because the human belief in them is so powerful that it has generated a fear that is sometimes difficult to break through. But the absolute truth for us is, in our work, thou hast no power except whatever power comes from God. Now, you see then that we, in this infinite way, have principles like this that are to be found in no other literature. But if you don't know these principles and know that they constitute the infinite way, you can't practice them. You'll go around with half knowledge and half faith. And a little knowledge is a very bad thing. Sometimes better to have none. If you are to practice, to live the infinite way, know what it is you're practicing and living. Know what kind of a God it is that you've aligned yourself with. Know what kind of prayer is expected of you. Know what these principles are so that you don't go around protecting yourselves from evil powers when your protection consists really of knowing it isn't a power. There's only one power. That's the Father within me, closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet at all times. Well, when you have these principles, you have the correct letter of truth. And there are many more such, remember. I'm only touching on a couple of the very top ones because they're the most startling ones. But you will find the rest through the writings and recordings. But fill yourself with the correct letter. That's why this isn't easy. It takes time. It takes hours out of your days or out of your nights. It takes many minutes out of your days to consciously remember as you're walking along the street or are in business or shopping or marketing. This is a teaching that keeps the consciousness busy every minute. It leaves no room for idle dreaming. It leaves lots of room for dreaming, but spiritual dreaming, not idle dreaming. It leaves no room for wasting time with most of the things that occupy the people of the world. You have to come out and be separate. You can't stay in the world and of the world and yet be a disciple. You can be in the world, but you can't be of it. You have to be separate. You have to live a life inside your own mind that is your real life, so that the people only see your body, but they don't know the life that you are living or what you are entertaining in your consciousness. Outwardly, you appear as the rest of mankind, but that's only your body. You yourself, in your innermost consciousness, you're dwelling in a different world. You're dwelling in a world where lions and lambs can lie down together. Why? Because God is the soul of a lion as well as God is the soul of a lamb. And if you know this, your lion and your lamb can lie down together. Not the other fellows. 1,000 shall fall at his side and 10,000 at his right, because it's fulfilling his belief. But once you realize and live in this consciousness of God, the Father within, as one power, you're leading a life entirely separate from your neighbor. Then when your neighbor starts talking about how terrible the weather is and what it does to rheumatism, and you inside, outside with your lips, you're saying, yes, yes, too bad, because you don't want them to send you up the river somewhere. But inwardly you're saying, thank God. Thank God, at least I know there's no God that would permit such a thing. Thank God I know there's no God that would empower weather to do this, or climate to do it. Thank God I know that there's no God that would permit germs to infect or poisons to kill. I know that power isn't in anything. Power is in me, in the kingdom of God within me. The Father within me is the only power I acknowledge. And if there's anything out here, it's the power of God that empowers it. Now we have one more point that I would like to bring to you. And that is this. Why that look? Well, I'm going to give it to you anyhow. So if it isn't on the tape, you'll remember it. This is in one of the writings, and so you'll come across it. You'll see the importance of it. You see this hand? I ask you the question, is it a good hand or is it a bad hand? And your answer has to be, how can it be good or bad? It's just a hand. Oh, but I'll say, is it a giving hand or a withholding hand? And you say, the hand, how can it give anything? How can it withhold anything? You're absolutely right. There's no power in this hand. The power is in I. I could give or I could withhold. I can pet or I can punch. I can steal or I can give. But not the hand. The hand is an instrument of mine. Do you follow that? When I remember that about the heart and the liver and the lungs and the bowels and the kidneys and the muscles, will you please remember they can't be good and they can't be bad and they can't be healthy and they can't be diseased? They can't be. They can just be your body. They can just be your heart. What they do, you determine that. And you determine it in two ways, in one of two ways. You determine it either by allowing yourself to be influenced by the world belief, which says that the heart governs your life, or by the truth that the Father within me is the only life, and that life governs the heart. You see that? So it is. What would you think of a person who is immoral and who used for an alibi, oh, I'm not immoral, it's my body did it? No. You wouldn't accept that for a minute. The body can't do a thing. I do. Now the question is, do I do it as a victim of world belief, which says the body has control over me? Or do I live in accordance with truth, which says, if you destroy this temple in 3 days, I can raise it up again? Because the Father within me is the power over this body. Do you see that? Now this is a tremendous principle. It's the difference between life and death. Because our entire fear of death is because we believe the body can kill us. That the body has government over our life. But the secret is, the Father within me is the power over the body. See that? And if you destroy this body, I, the Father within me, can raise it up again in 3 days. So don't give the body any more power to be diseased than you would give your hand the power to steal. Your hand can't steal. You can if you choose, but your hand can't. Your hand can only be an instrument that you would use. The same as you might use an acetylene torch to open a safe. But then you can't blame the acetylene torch for being a thief. Now, two things govern us. Or rather, I should say, one of two things. And sometimes a combination of two things. The human belief and the spiritual truth. The human belief has two powers in this world, good and evil. Spiritual truth says there's only one power, and I, the Father within me, is that power.